Hello students, myself Dr. Sachin Kapur, and I wish you a very warm welcome to this session of Zoology lecture. The topic of our discussion is Folliculogenesis. Folliculogenesis is the process of formation of follicles in the ovary. You know, ovaries are the primary sex organs in case of females. Ovaries are paired, almond-shaped, intra-abdominal structures. Ovaries are located inside the main body cavity. There are two ovaries, right and left. In this diagram, you can see a sectional view of the ovary. This region is called ovarian cortex and this is ovarian medulla. The outer region is cortex region, inner region is medulla region. Here you can see that the blood vessels and the lymph vessels, nerves, they enter into the ovary. The cortex is lined by cuboidal epithelium, which is also called surface epithelium or the germinal epithelium. This one, I am labeling it as surface epithelium. These structures which you can see here are follicles. Follicle is what? With reference to ovary, follicle is an oocyte surrounded by granulosa cells. The central cell is oocyte, which is going to form the female gamete, that is ovum. It is surrounded by granulosa cells. The different stages of follicular development you can see in the ovary. There is primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary, tertiary and Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle is the final mature follicle which undergoes ovulation. What is ovulation? Process of release of oocyte. It is actually secondary oocyte arrested at metaphase 2 stage from the ovary. So this Graafian follicle is the final mature follicle. It ruptures and the secondary oocyte is released. Now, these follicles are present in the cortex region only. The follicles, they are not present in medulla. The medulla region has blood vessels, lymph vessels and nerves. Now let's understand the different stages of follicular development. As I said that first there is primordial follicle. What's a primordial follicle? Primordial follicle is an oocyte which is surrounded by flattened epithelial cells. Like this, as I'm showing in the diagram. Oocyte surrounded by flattened epithelial cells. This simple structure is what is primordial oocyte. The next developmental stage is primary follicle. What's a primary follicle? See, a primary follicle is the one in which formation of zona pellucida layer has started. I am showing zona pellucida with another color. This layer is zona pellucida, a glycoproteinaceous layer. It's made up of glycoproteins. The formation of the zona pellucida starts and it is surrounded by cuboidal epithelial cells. The primary follicle, it was flattened epithelial cells. Here in this case it is cuboidal epithelial cells. So from primordial follicle we have seen that the developmental stage, the next one is primary follicle. After primary follicle, which is the next stage? Secondary follicle. Now what happens in case of secondary follicle? The formation of the zona pellucida is completed. These cells, the epithelial cells which we are calling them right now, they are now called the granulosa cells, right? So I'll draw the diagram for the secondary follicle. Let's use this area for drawing the secondary follicle. In case of secondary follicle, the formation of zona pellucida is completed. See, this glycoproteinaceous layer completely formed here. Formation of ZP completed. These cells are now called granulosa cells. The granulosa cells multiply, they increase in number, overall size of the follicle increases. Let's draw some more layers of granulosa cells, and overall this structure is secondary follicle. So in secondary follicle, formation of zona pellucida is completed and formation of thecal layers, theca externa and theca interna, starts. These glandular and vascular cells are theca interna. So I am labeling here theca interna. Formation of theca interna and theca externa. It's a fibrous layer. This is theca externa. It is fibrous, it is avascular. So formation of the thecal layers, that is theca interna and theca externa, starts. Clear? This structure is what? It is secondary follicle. This was primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle. Next is tertiary follicle and then Graafian follicle. Now what happens when this secondary follicle is going to develop further? The granulosa cells, they further increase in number. Overall size of the follicle increases. Formation of thecal layers is completed. A cavity which is called a follicular cavity or antrum starts appearing. Cavity which is also called the follicular cavity or antrum starts appearing, and that gets filled with the antral fluid or the follicular fluid which is secreted by these granulosa cells. So the follicle finally forms Graafian follicle, which is the final mature follicle that undergoes ovulation. Now let me show you the structure of Graafian follicle. The diameter is nearly 2.5 centimeters, and you can see it with your naked eye in the ovary. It's quite a big bulging structure from the surface of ovary. In the Graafian follicle, the oocyte is not exactly in the center. The oocyte is slightly placed away from the center. It is eccentrically placed. So this is oocyte. Now I am going to show you the different layers around this oocyte. As I said, that the immediate layer is what is the zona pellucida, right? Nucleus of the oocyte. These granulosa cells, they are forming a layer which is called corona radiata. So this layer is corona radiata. We'll label all these layers. Here we have the layer of granulosa cells called membrana granulosa. The cells which I am drawing right now are the granulosa cells. It is just that they have occupied different location, because a cavity starts appearing in the follicle. The cavity keeps on enlarging and the granulosa cells are pushed to different locations. A mass of cells connect the corona radiata with membrana granulosa. This mass of cells is what is called Cumulus oophorus. These are the cells of theca interna. As I said, theca interna is glandular, it is vascular. LH hormone, the luteinizing hormone of the anterior pituitary, acts on these cells, theca interna. Outside to that is what? Theca externa. So these cells, these fibers in fact, which I am showing here, are the theca externa. Let's label this. The outermost layer, as I said, is theca externa. Okay, below that is what? Theca interna. This is theca interna. Below that is membrana granulosa, layer of granulosa cells, membrana granulosa. This cavity is what is follicular cavity or the antrum. As I said that as the follicle develops further, a cavity called follicular cavity starts appearing. It's also called antrum, and it gets filled with follicular fluid. This is follicular fluid secreted by these granulosa cells only. This layer of cells is corona radiata. Below that, with the blue color, we have shown zona pellucida, glycoproteinaceous layer. And this mass of cells is what is Cumulus oophorus. This diagram is of Graafian follicle, the final mature follicle which undergoes ovulation. Is it clear? Right? So this structure, the diameter is nearly 2.5 centimeters, quite a big structure. The wall of Graafian follicle then ruptures and the secondary oocyte, this oocyte which is inside, that oocyte is released, and that process is called ovulation. So just look at this. The first stage was primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, tertiary we have not drawn. In journal I told you that what's going to happen when this changes into this. So finally we get a structure in the ovary, that is Graafian follicle, and that Graafian follicle undergoes ovulation. What is ovulation? The process of release of secondary oocyte from the ovary. Ovulation, process of release of oocyte from ovary, right? And that oocyte, please remember, it is secondary oocyte arrested at metaphase 2 stage. This oocyte, specifically if I have to write, it is secondary oocyte. Once the oocyte has been released from the Graafian follicle, the remaining cells, they form a temporary endocrine gland which is called corpus luteum. Corpus luteum, which is also called yellow body because it has lutein protein and carotene pigment that gives it yellowish tint. What is corpus luteum? A temporary endocrine gland which is formed from the remaining cells of Graafian follicle after ovulation. Once the Graafian follicle ruptures, secondary oocyte released, the remaining cells are going to form corpus luteum. This corpus luteum secretes small amount of estrogen and it secretes large amount of progesterone. Progesterone and estrogen are steroid hormones. So corpus luteum is source of estrogen as well as progesterone. Which hormone causes ovulation? Remember, it is LH, luteinizing hormone. It is ovulation causing hormone. That we'll discuss in detail when we'll discuss the female reproductive cycle. So that was in brief about folliculogenesis, the process of formation of the follicles in the ovary. Ovaries are formed during 11th to 12th week of pregnancy. They are intra-abdominal structures. They have a cortex region and a medulla region. Follicle, the different development stages are what? Primordial, primary, secondary, tertiary and Graafian follicle. Right? See, there are thousands and thousands of follicles in the ovary, but all the follicles are not capable of ovulating. Many follicles, they die because of a genetically programmed process that is called follicular atresia. So what is follicular atresia? A genetically programmed process which destroys majority of the follicles. The significance of atresia is to limit the number of oocytes which can be released from the ovary. In our coming lectures, we will discuss what is the significance of atresia, why it appeared in the course of the primate evolution. How is it related to bipedalism? Humans are bipedal. Bipedal means that they walk on two legs. Right? In the course of evolution, we have acquired bipedalism. The reproductive tract of the female is facing downwards. Uterus cannot afford to carry multiple offsprings, so she cannot afford to release multiple oocytes from the ovary in one cycle. That's the reason that why atresia happens. A female has thousands and thousands of follicles in her ovary, but in her entire reproductive life, that is from menarche to menopause, from the beginning of menstrual cycle to the end of menstrual cycle, she can release only 400 to 450 ova from her ovaries, both the ovaries. Remaining all the oocytes or the follicles, they undergo degeneration. We will discuss it again when we will discuss the menstrual cycle. So that's all about folliculogenesis. I hope the concept is clear to you now.